As someone who's been fascinated by philosophy for quite some time now, I usually spend at least 20 minutes before I go to sleep thinking about life and various concepts relating to reality and existence, so I thought it'd be fun to make a video summarising a few of the theories that keep me up at night. I'm also working on a dark philosophy concepts iceberg that should be up within the next couple of weeks, so if you enjoy thinking about this stuff, then keep an eye out for that. Anyway, let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also have a Patreon and a PayPal, so if you're interested in supporting the channel, feel free to check those out, links will be in the description. You can also leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video is sponsored by Adam and Eve, the adult toy company that has been in business for over 50 years. They offer discreet shipping, 90-day no-hassle returns, 24/7 customer service, and 20% of their profits go to fight the spread of HIV around the world. Go to adamandeve.com and use the code SLEUTH for 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada. Some exclusions apply. The vast majority of us live our lives believing that we are in control of our own actions, that every decision we make is out of our own free will, and that we could have chosen to act differently in any given situation in the past. Our legal system is based on this assumption. If someone commits a crime, we punish them based on the idea that they chose to commit that crime, and instead could have chosen not to. If they had no choice, then it wouldn't really be fair to punish them at all. The theory that we don't actually have free will is the only one I've covered in this video that I actually believe, and it sounds crazy at first, but hear me out. This will only be a brief summary, but I could make a whole video on this as it's something that's fascinated me for a long time and it's quite a complex concept, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Anyway, arguments against free will can be categorised into philosophical arguments and neuroscientific evidence. Let's start with the latter. In 1983, a study was conducted in which participants were wired up to an EEG machine that would measure their brain activity, then asked to perform a hand movement and record the exact time that they did so. Cerebral activity in the brain was found to have occurred at least several hundred milliseconds before participants made the conscious decision to move their hands, suggesting that their brains had already made the decision to act before they were consciously aware of it. And if that is the case, they could not have been acting out of free will. Some criticise this study because although there was a time difference, the amount of time between the brain activity and the person actually reacting was still less than a second, so there is room for error there. However, in 2008, another similar study was conducted where participants were wired up to an fMRI machine and asked to choose between pressing two buttons. One would be pressed with a finger on their right hand and the other with a finger on their left. The results were shocking, as brain activity was found to occur up to 10 seconds before the participant pressed the button, and two brain regions encoded with high accuracy whether the subject was about to choose the left or right button prior to their conscious decision. The philosophical argument I'm about to cover was really the smoking gun for me. I first heard it in a video uploaded by Cosmic Skeptic titled "Why Free Will Doesn't Exist." And I'd highly recommend checking that out as he explains it a lot better than I can, but to summarise. Every decision we have ever made or ever will make is either because we want to or because we're forced to. If we're forced to do something, then we haven't acted out of free will, and while it may initially seem that if we do something because we want to, that must be a result of free will, we don't actually get to choose what we want to do. As philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Let's say you're at an ice cream parlour and you have a choice of vanilla or chocolate ice cream. You hate chocolate, so you pick vanilla. When it comes to food and many other things, you haven't chosen what you like or dislike. Life would be a lot easier if you did get to choose. I hate spicy food. If I go for a curry, I have to pick the mildest on the menu, and even then it's often too hot for me. If I could choose to like spicy food, I'd be less restricted in terms of what I can eat, so there'd be no reason for me not to choose to like spicy food. Because I don't like spice, I'm always going to choose a mild curry because I want to eat something that I'll enjoy. Theoretically, I could choose a spicy curry even if I don't like it, and surely that would be me exercising my free will, right? Not exactly. I would have to want to choose a spicy curry, and there would have to be a reason for me to want to choose a spicy curry. Maybe I want to try to get used to the spice, or maybe I want to prove I have free will by choosing something I don't like. Either way, that decision is driven by a want that is stronger than my want to choose a food that I would enjoy eating, and I don't get to choose which want is stronger, it just is. Back to ice cream. You hate chocolate. That doesn't totally prevent you from choosing chocolate ice cream, but you can't just flick a switch and choose to like chocolate ice cream, so there would have to be a want that would drive you to choose chocolate over vanilla, which you do like. If that want is to prove that you have free will, that's because you want to prove that you have free will, and the want to prove that you have free will is stronger than your want to eat vanilla because you prefer it. And again, you don't get to choose which want is stronger, it just is. Why are you watching this video right now? Because you want to. If I tell you to choose to not want to watch it, you can't. You could choose not to watch it, but that's not the same as not wanting to watch it. And if you choose not to watch it, there has to be another want that overrides your want to watch it. Well, that got very wordy. The idea that you can't choose what you want is already enough to dispel the concept of free will, in my opinion, but there are a few other relevant considerations too. Most of us can accept that our environment affects us and the decisions we make. For example, beliefs and values that were taught during childhood often stick with us. Mental illness or drugs and alcohol can cause us to do things we wouldn't do in a sober and psychologically healthy state. If you agree, then you can't really believe in total free will. At the very least, you believe in compatibilism, also known as soft determinism. Simplistically, a combination of free will and determinism. Determinism referring to the assertion that human consciousness is predetermined. It's worth noting that determinism is not the same as fatalism, which states that absolutely everything, not just human conscious, is predetermined, and therefore absolutely everything that has ever happened and ever will happen is inevitable. You might think of this as fate. Compatibilism makes the distinction between internal and external influences on decisions. For example, if you make a decision while drunk that you wouldn't normally make sober, alcohol is an external influence, and therefore its effect on human behaviour is deterministic. However, you supposedly have control over the decision of whether or not you drink alcohol, which is made through your own free will. As we already discussed, you would choose to drink alcohol because you wanted to, and you don't get to choose what you want to do. So that decision may be internal, but it's arguably not really as a result of free will, and that logic can be applied to all internal decisions. It simply doesn't make sense for both free will and determinism to exist at the same time, because determinism states that all actions are predetermined by a chain of causation that predates your birth and even human existence, so compatibilism is an oxymoron because you can't simultaneously believe that all actions are predetermined, yet some are not. Once again, Cosmic Skeptic explains this much better than I have, so I'd recommend watching his video, Compatibilism Debunked, for a more in-depth explanation. Even though I can accept that I don't have free will, it's almost impossible for me to really feel that that is the case, because it's incomprehensible that I didn't really choose to sit down and write this script, that I didn't really choose the topic of this video, and that I couldn't have chosen a different topic or chosen not to write the script at all. Believing in the concept of free will is instinctual. No one wants to believe that they aren't in control of their own actions because that's a scary thought. But it seems that the only argument for free will that we can't argue against is that we all feel like we have it. And considering thoughts and feelings are highly subjective and in no way count as empirical evidence, that's not an adequate reason to continue living under the illusion. Many of you are probably already somewhat familiar with simulation theory, but seeing as the next theory ties into it, I thought it'd be useful to give a brief summary of it before moving on to that. I personally believe that pretty much any technological advancement we can imagine will be possible one day, even if it's thousands of years in the future, providing the human race doesn't get wiped out first. I remember hearing a while ago that in the last 50 years, we've made more technological progress than we have since the beginning of time, and in the last 10 years, we've made more progress than the last 50. So continuing at the accelerated rate we are now, it makes sense to me that at some point in the future, almost anything will be possible. So I think that one day we will be able to create realistic simulations, and if that is the case, who's to say we aren't already living in one? Creating a realistic simulation would be extremely difficult, though maybe not quite as hard as you might initially think. The simulation only needs to be complex enough to convince the subjects that live in it that it is real. There wouldn't really be a need to simulate all the galaxies that we believe exist, only the space that we have explored so far, which is minuscule compared to the space we believe to exist. We know everything is made up of atoms or cells, but we only see the outer layer of objects, so the smaller details don't need to be rendered until, say, we look at a leaf under a microscope. If you're not convinced that you could be fooled into thinking a simulation is real, you only need to consider dreams. We've all had a dream at one point, probably many over the course of our lives, that we really felt was real, not only during the dream, but sometimes for a short while after we've woken up. I dozed off on the sofa a couple of weeks ago, woke up to someone knocking at the door, some weird irrelevant stuff happened, and then I woke up again, realised that was a dream, and then the same thing happened again, and then I woke up for real, and for a little while I was so disorientated and couldn't work out whether any of that had actually happened. Even when you wake up and instantly know it's a dream, you never, or at least rarely, know it's a dream while it's actually happening. While the validity of simulation theory has been questioned by many, there are some intelligent people who believe it's a possibility, including Neil deGrasse Tyson and Elon Musk, who said the chances of us living in base reality are 1 in billions. Philosopher Nick Bostrom suggested that we may be in an ancestral simulation run by a post-human species, and proposed that one of the 3 following assumptions must be true. 1. Humans will become extinct before they ever reach a point that they're able to create a simulation. 2. Humans survive to a point where they're able to create a simulation but choose not to. This seems unlikely considering we already create simulations, just not particularly realistic ones, like the game The Sims. 3. Humans survive until a point that they can create a simulation and they choose to do so, in which case there's a chance we're already living in the simulation. As a side note, you may have heard of the Great Filter Theory, which proposes the concept of some kind of barrier that prevents the endless evolution of intelligent life, or results in self-destruction. It's a possible resolution of the Fermi paradox, which is defined as the conflict between the lack of clear, obvious evidence for extraterrestrial life and various high estimates for their existence. If the Great Filter Theory is true, the filter may be behind us, as in we've already overcome it, or ahead of us, as in we've yet to face it. What if the filter is the realization that we're living in a simulation? Simulation theory actually explains a lot of weird occurrences that people experience, for example déjà vu. Maybe we feel like we've experienced certain events before because we actually have. We could be characters in a game that died, and so whoever is controlling us is replaying the level. If we do live in a simulation, who is controlling it and why? There are many possibilities. As already mentioned, it could be future, or rather present, but future to us, humans, who created a simulation either for fun or to test certain hypotheses. Think of everything going on in the world right now. We have climate change, we could be on the brink of World War III, we went through a global pandemic. All of these events are frightening and significant, and perhaps the humans of the future wanted to see how these would play out. If the human race survived until a point that they were able to create simulations, they of course survived everything that happened until that point. So maybe they wanted to see what would happen if they never discovered a solution for climate change, or they just allowed it to happen. What would happen if there was a world war in a time when nuclear weapons are more efficient and effective than in the past? What would happen if a potentially deadly virus swept across the world, and how we deal with it? The curiosity may lie in how humanity as a whole would face such situations, or even how they might affect individuals on a personal level. The results could be used to formulate political policies or work out solutions to problems. Rather than predicting whether or not they'll be effective, a simulation could be created to test them. Maybe the simulation was created by aliens, perhaps with just some alien kid's science experiment, or even a video game. The possibilities are endless. If we are living in a simulation, it's very likely that there are multiple other simulations occurring at the same time, because it makes sense that whoever is running them would want to change variables to see how these changes would alter the outcome. And so this theory could support the parallel universe theory too, just not in the way we tend to think of it. What I find interesting about simulation theory and the others in this video is that they're unfalsifiable. That doesn't necessarily make them true, but they're interesting to ponder on because we have no way of disproving them. Another noteworthy point is that if we are living in a simulation, potentially one of many, each individual person is basically irrelevant. Simulation aside, this is kind of already the case, unless you believe in creationalism. We live, we die, and for the vast majority of us, a few years after our death, no one will even remember we existed. This puts a lot into perspective. It might seem a little depressing at first, but if you look at it another way, you may as well live your life without overthinking or regretting things, because none of it even matters. The simulation could be stopped at any point. Stop worrying about that embarrassing moment that happened 5 years ago, because on the off chance anyone else even remembers it now, it's not going to matter when you and they are dead and gone. Wear that eccentric outfit that you impulse bought, then worried it wouldn't suit you. Tell that person you've been in love with for years how you feel. Stop agreeing to things that you don't want to do because you're worried of what people might think. Because none of it will matter in the end, and you're a lot less important in the world than you think you are. NPC is short for non-player character, and refers to characters in video games that can't be controlled by the player of the game. Sometimes they are important characters that a playable character will interact with to further the plot, or they might exist solely for the purpose of populating the world to make it feel more immersive. They could be your teammate that helps you throughout the game, or you might just run into them occasionally. For example, shopkeepers or strangers in the street that offer you advice, or just spew random garbage that isn't really relevant or useful. The NPC theory suggests that many people in the world, possibly even everyone but you, is an NPC. If you entertain the possibility that we are living in a simulation akin to a video game, it kinda makes sense that not everyone in the world is a conscious being like we are, or at least like we believe we are. Why simulate nearly 8 billion individual conscious beings when you could gather the information you desire from, say, 1 billion people and make the rest NPCs for the purpose of making the simulation feel more real to the actual subjects? If you take a look on YouTube or TikTok, you can find countless videos showing people that don't really seem real, staring into space or wandering down the street, seemingly oblivious to their surroundings. You may have even encountered people like this yourself. Most of the time, if you were to approach these people and start a conversation, they'll probably respond, with varying levels of interactivity, but it's only at this point that they seem to actually be somewhat in touch with what's happening around them. Even if we disregard people at this extreme level of obliviousness, how many people that you meet really strike you as totally unique individuals who think and feel freely and don't just agree with the majority? NPC theory suggests that many beings you interact with are nothing more than sheeple. Docile, easily led, copies of one another with very small and relatively insignificant differences, going through the motions and floating through life following the crowd, just like the civilians in GTA, for example. Then there are people that just seem off. Whether or not there is an objectively right way to behave is debatable, and the definition of normal is different for everyone. But there are some people that most can agree act strangely, and these could be NPCs. It has also been suggested that people who don't have an internal monologue might be NPCs too. As someone who does have an internal monologue that never shuts up, it's almost inconceivable to me that some people don't have one, but I found an Ask Reddit thread where people attempted to explain it, and it seems like they visualise things rather than silently verbalising thoughts. Apparently it's even possible for someone to lose their inner voice. For example, one commenter said that they used to have one and they'd write novels, then suddenly one day after a lot of trauma, it just vanished, and they haven't been able to write much since then. That's absolutely terrifying to me because I can't help but feel like my internal monologue is an integral part of me and my consciousness. So if one day it just vanished and there was nothing but silence in my mind, I'd feel like a part of me was missing. People without an internal monologue might actually be more common than you'd think. In fact, a study conducted by Russell Hurlburt suggested that around 75% of people don't have one, though I believe that very high percentage might not actually be accurate due to the methodology he used. He gave his students a beeper that randomly went off a few times over a number of days and asked them to record what was happening in their minds when they heard it, later asking more specific questions like whether they visualised anything or felt an emotion. Most of his students struggled to explain what was going on in their minds, and when he asked them for specific words or sentences, many weren't able to answer, leading him to believe that they didn't have an inner voice. If he had revealed from the off that the purpose of the study was to find out how many people had an internal monologue, that may have affected the results. But because he didn't, I suspect that some of the students didn't really grasp what he was asking for, especially considering people with an internal monologue will likely assume that everyone has one, just like I did for most of my life until I recently found out that's not the case. I asked a few of my friends if they have one, and none of them said that they didn't. One said that in addition to the monologue, they also visualise words and names. So for example, if I were to say the word tiger to them, they'd instantly imagine it written in their mind. Stuff like this highlights how we all experience things differently, and I find it absolutely fascinating. It really opens your eyes to the fact that perception is subjective. The idea that people without an internal monologue must stem from the presumably incorrect assumption that those people don't have thoughts. As I said, I find it very hard to imagine not having one, so I can't really explain it myself. But if any NPCs watching this don't have an inner voice, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Well, I think NPC theory is possible, in the sense that almost anything is possible, at least there's no way of disproving it. I personally think it's very unlikely, and I think that most people who actively believe it, understandably, have a hard time comprehending the idea that there are billions of other people in the world who each have lives as complex as their own. It's easy to see the world from quite a self-centered point of view, because our own eyes are the only eyes we'll ever see the world through. Our own consciousness is the only consciousness we'll ever experience. We'll only ever think our own thoughts and feel our own feelings, and it really is quite mind-blowing to consider that every other person you pass on the street also experiences their own subjective version of reality. It can be hard to wrap our heads around the idea that another person's normal may be entirely different to ours. So when someone acts totally different in a situation to what we would, we think there must be something wrong with them, when in actuality there are many versions of normal. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any other terrifying theories about life that you might have. I'm totally down for making a part 2, so let me know if you'd like to see that. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my patrons, whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.